The San Francisco Giants were pretty much the most extreme team in baseball in 2021. From Tyler Rogers, who just had ridiculously extreme numbers across the board, all the way on through to multiple players. We're going to talk about those extreme characteristics for the Giants next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide episodes 3 days a week for now, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well, so check us out there if you have not already. And coming up on today's show, as I said, we're going to talk about the San Francisco Giants being a team of extremes. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So let's start talking about Tyler Rogers. I was inspired for this by I listened to a podcast with Giants bullpen and catching coach Craig Alvarez, and he just kind of they asked him, it was on Fangraphs, and they asked him, honestly, I can't actually remember what the question was, but his answer was Tyler Rogers. The question was about who has the most unique kind of pitch characteristics, and he said Tyler Rogers is just completely off the charts, and it makes sense as to why, given the funky angles of Tyler Rogers. And it got me kind of just digging into the numbers here, and I put out a tweet that inspired today's episode. So what I found was the following. Tyler Rogers ranks among 363 pitchers with at least 100 innings since the start of the 2019 season. And his ranks here. He's allowed just a 1.5 barrel percentage, and that is best in all of baseball. He induces soft contact on 24.9% of batted balls. That is second best in all of baseball. His home run rate since 2019 is just 0.5 home runs per 9 innings. That is third best in all of baseball. His zone rate, percentage of pitches in the strike zone, 48.9%. That is the third highest rate in all of baseball. His ERA is 2.56, eighth best. His ground ball rate is 58.6%, eighth best. And his walk rate is just 4.2%, ninth best. And then I go on to point out that he has these really odd reverse platoon splits. Normally, I would say in a small sample that it's probably not going to last, but in his case, they're pretty extreme, and it actually makes sense. Why? Given the the rising slider is what does it in for me. He literally lets go of the pitch around the ground, and then it rises up and comes up and in to left-handed hitters. And as a result, I would say lefties are hitting just 188 with a 262 on base and 243 slugging. So well under a 100 isolated power, just no power to speak of from left-handed hitters to go along with barely getting on base, just 26% of the time on base. Righties, on the other hand, hitting 282, much, much higher, 100 points roughly higher, 309 on base and 386 slugging. So to some, a 243 slugging for lefties and a 386 for righties would say, oh, wow, righties hit for way more power. But actually, the way to measure power is the slugging percentage minus the batting average. You're taking the singles out of the slugging percentage, and it's under 100 against lefties, and it's about 100 against righties. So even though the slugging is much higher by right-handed hitters, it's still not very much power to speak of. And it's interesting. I mean, these are odd platoon splits. There's a lot of singles. That's a high batting average, significantly above the league average batting average here, 282. But he doesn't walk people, and they still don't hit for very much power. So overall, hitters have a 289 on base, 326 slugging, and Tyler Rogers is just a pitcher of extremes. And it makes sense given, if you watch him pitch, he has an extremely odd and unique delivery, and the results are extremely odd and unique. And so he's not the only one, but I did just want to spend a little time shouting out Tyler Rogers because I think that, throughout the course of the season, he took some heat a little bit because, admittedly, I'll be the first to admit, he would come into games and there was just so much contact because in 2021 specifically, he had just a 16.9% strikeout rate. League average is around 24%. His previous 2 seasons, he was around 23%. So he was more league average. But this year, for whatever reason, there was a lot more contact. And so as a result, there's more hits to go around when you're putting the ball in play more often. And he induces such weak contact that you would often see infield hits. So much so that I proposed that if the Giants had a 2-run lead or more when he comes into the game, that they should consider going to a 2-man outfield because he allows so many ground balls among the leaders in the sport. And I just think, take away the infield hit and you live with something to the outfield. It kind of depends, and I just thought maybe they would try it, but they never did. So anyway, he took some heat for making things interesting a lot more often than you would think, given the ultimate results. But he gets it done. He ended up on the season with a 2.22 ERA. It's really hard to argue with the results. And in his young career, spanning 126 and 2/3 innings, he has a 2.56 ERA, as I said, which is the 8th best in all of baseball during that span among pitchers with at least 100 innings pitched since 2019. So anyway, the Giants kind of got things done, especially on the pitching side, by living in extremes. So coming up next, we're going to talk about the other extremes with the San Francisco Giants. We'll talk about Jake McGee, Tommy Lestella, Jose Alvarez, Anthony Scoffani, all of these guys, and then the team overall contributed. It's crazy how in all kinds of different categories the Giants were at the top. So they really did live in extremes. And it makes sense given they won 107 games. You got to have some extreme characteristics to do that, I would say, and they did. But first, it's that time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. Yes, you heard me right. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors like yummy, cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. Man, I am getting hungry again just thinking about it now. And it's a guilt-free bar to eat. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Built Bar has just 4. Go to BuiltBar.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure the often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning? Is your Odyssey an LX or is it an EX? And wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same auto parts from a chain store or car dealership when you can just go to rockauto.com, a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com, See all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices. All the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. All right, here we go. We're going to continue talking about the extreme nature of the San Francisco Giants, with Tyler Rogers kind of being the poster boy, I would say, of their extreme characteristics. And it's significant to note that, for example, Tyler Rogers, it's very unconventional, right? So he lives in the extremes in an unconventional way. And it's kind of like the Giants have found certain areas that are undervalued. And if you find extremes in these areas, as opposed to like, a big standout statistic might be strikeout rate. And so, yeah, it's great if you're leading the league in strikeout percentage, but those players are hard to come by because they're in very high demand. But it seems that the Giants have found areas in which to kind of focus that are not as in vogue, and yet by being first in so many of these unorthodox areas, it led to a team that won 107 games. So an example of that, I mean, maybe it's not so much of an undervalued area, but I was noticing, and we knew this at the time when the Giants signed him, but how about Tommy Lestella? It was not a great year for Tommy Lestella. He dealt with a couple of injuries that limited him very much so, but when we look at strikeout to walk ratio, or walk to strikeout ratio, it's crazy. I mean, Lestella is up there with the likes of Juan Soto and Alex Bregman at the top of the list. There's also Luis Arias mixed in, who's an interesting player in his own right and lives in extremes in his own right. He's on the Minnesota Twins. He just doesn't hit for any power, but Lestella does. There's also Carlos Santana, Anthony Rendon, Mookie Betts kind of rounding out the top of this list here. But Lestella is fourth in all of baseball since 2019 in strikeout to walk ratio, and he mostly does it by not striking out. Some of these other players, the strikeout rate is a little higher, but in 2019, Lestella's strikeout rate was 8.7%, and in 2020, 5.3%. This year was the worst of the bunch. His strikeout rate, ballooned up to 10.7%. I say that in jest because, league average, like I said earlier, is about 24%. So still significantly better than that for Lestella. And his walk rate was just 7.4%, which is more or less league average. But still, because the strikeout rate is so low, the two combined give him this borderline elite, or just actually elite, strikeout to walk ratio. And then we also can look at contact for Lestella since 2019, and he is fifth in all of baseball. Luis Arias, who I just mentioned a minute ago, is first. David Fletcher, Eric Sogard, but then Michael Brantley, Tommy Lestella, Joe Panik finds himself on this list. So contact percentage alone doesn't really seem to lead to a great offensive player because, Fletcher has his issues. Sogard's certainly not a great player. If you can be like Michael Brantley, though, I think that you're doing something well. So this is part of the reason why I liked Lestella so much. I wouldn't say advocating, but hoping that the Giants would sign him last winter. And when they did, I was very excited, but it was not a very good season for Tommy Lestella. The StatCast metrics, the kind of expected numbers based on quality of contact, were much better for Lestella than the final results would indicate. His weighted on base average was 307, but the expected weighted on base average was 339, just significantly higher. And to me, I attribute that to a lot of early season loud contact that found gloves. And I would expect, if he does that again, if the contact is the same, here's the thing about baseball, right? You just hit it hard and the rest is kind of up to chance. They can't pinpoint exactly where they're going to hit the ball. That would be hard enough if someone was kind of lobbing the ball in, but when they're throwing 98, you're just trying to square it up for the most part. Hitters these days can control launch angle a little bit more with technique changes, but even if you have kind of launch angle figured out, you're still not able to control where the spray is from line to line. And so anyway, if Lestella just continues to make the kind of contact he did in 2020 2021, I would expect him to have significantly better results in 2022. And that strikeout to walk ratio is a good indicator that the underlying skills are there, the quality of the at-bat type of skills. And then the contact was there. It just didn't lead to the results that we were hoping for in 2021. So, let's turn the page to some other extreme categories, talking about Jose Alvarez, Anthony Slefani, and then the team as a whole. Something that the Giants were extremely good at in 2021 was pounding the strike zone. So they controlled the strike zone on the pitching side, and they controlled the strike zone on the offensive side. And this is, honestly, I'm surprised that this isn't more. It is becoming more and more and more important to teams, but there are still teams that employ just kind of wild free swingers up and down their lineup, and it's easier to take advantage. But under the new front office, zone discipline, like pounding the strike zone, which, by the way, I would attribute to Logan Webb's breakout, right? Before his breakout season in 2021, his issue was erratic control and he was falling behind in counts. He was getting ahead and then wasting pitches that were not going to be chased. And then when he started just attacking the strike zone, we saw the leap that he was able to take. And this was team wide. And so the Giants led the major leagues in zone percentage, the percentage of pitches in the strike zone, regardless of if they were swung at, regardless of if they were called strikes or not. It could have been in the zone and called a ball, but it was in the zone. And that's what we're counting here. First in Major League Baseball at 44.3% by their pitchers. The worst team was at 40%, the Cincinnati Reds. So it seems like a small difference, but added up over the course of a season, and it's a big difference. So coming up next, we're going to talk about who the pitchers were that were kind of leading the charge here, and then some extreme and unique characteristics out of Jake McGee, Anthony Scoffani, and Jose Alvarez. But first, BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs right to the big game in less than a week. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, right along with real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, here we go. We're going to wrap up this discussion by just talking about some more extremes. We've talked about Tyler Rogers. I mean, I can't even begin. He's just extreme across the board. We've talked about Tommy Lestella. We've talked about the team zone percentage, and we didn't talk about how the Giants kind of controlled the strike zone on the other side of the ball. We'll get to that in a minute if we can, but let's talk about the fact that since 2019, guess who's the number one pitcher in baseball in percentage of pitches in the strike zone? Minimum 100 innings pitched. The hint is that, of course, he's on the San Francisco Giants. Think about who just pounds the zone. It's Jake McGee at 50.2%. He's the only pitcher in baseball over 50% since 2019. If you imagine, what do you think about when you think about Jake McGee? Fastballs in the strike zone. He doesn't really miss all that often. And then another extreme is Jake McGee's fastball usage. I actually don't have that pulled up right now, but when the Giants signed him, going into 2021, we were able to look back at his 2020 season and see that nobody threw any pitch more frequently than Jake McGee threw his fastball. And it was something like 95% of the time, 98% of the time, something ridiculous like that, over 90%. I believe that came down a little bit in 2021 with the Giants, but not by much. When you think about McGee, you think fastballs and pounding the zone, and generally fastballs up in the zone. So the number 3 pitcher in zone percentage since 2019 happens to be Tyler Rogers. So, man, do the Giants just have some pitchers who pound the strike zone? Number 6 in baseball is Jarlin Garcia. So over and over and over, no matter who comes in, they're not really walking people, and they are attacking the strike zone. And that's very much a good thing for a team. I mean, think about how frustrating it is when a pitcher just nibbles and nibbles, and it's what gets them into trouble. And so moving on, let's talk about Jose Alvarez for a second. It shocked me when I looked at, again, since 2019, minimum 100 innings pitched. There's this metric that Fangraphs uses to basically value different pitches, and then you can look at the value of pitches on a scale of per 100 pitches, the run value of the pitch per 100 thrown. And nobody's fastball has been more valuable per 100 thrown since 2019 than Jose Alvarez's fastball. And that shocked me a little bit. I mean, think about the contract that Jose Alvarez signed. Think about how kind of under the radar Jose Alvarez is. He did not start out the season well. And remember, the big issue to start the season against the Mariners in that opening series, I think on opening day even, was in an inability to throw strikes. And the whole bullpen kind of melted down in that area in that game, in which the Giants blew, what was it, a 5-0 lead or a 5-run lead late in the game. But when the season was all said and done, Jose Alvarez ended up with a 2.37 ERA, a 3.15 fielding independent pitching. Strikeout rate was kind of an alarmingly low 15.8%, but he just wasn't hit hard and he threw a lot of strikes. And we talked when the Giants signed him about his consistency and the fact that year after year after year, he throws 50-plus innings, and the highest ERA he's had since his rookie season in 2013 was a 3.88 ERA in 2017. But other than that, I mean, we're looking at 3.49, 3.45, 2.71, 3.36, and then 1.42 in 2020, and then 2.37 with the Giants in 2021. And so what an underrated kind of signing Jose Alvarez was for the San Francisco Giants. And that it was a 2-year deal, $2.55 million over 2 years, just very much a bargain, and just one of another example of extreme kind of characteristics, with Jose Alvarez, of all people's fastball being among the most valuable, or literally being the most valuable the most valuable fastball per 100 thrown since 2019 among pitchers with at least 100 innings pitched. So there's more. I mean, God, I could go on and on, but let's finish it up by talking about Anthony Sclefani's fastball. When we look at the top fastballs of 2021 by this same metric that Fangraphs uses, per 100 thrown, Anthony Sclefani comes in at number 5, and it's an incredible list that he finds himself on. Max Scherzer, number 1. I think we can all imagine that Scherzer fastball. It's a classic pitch, and it's very effective. Walker Buehler, same thing. It's his best pitch. Brandon Woodruff, who's just a dynamite pitcher for the Brewers, great fastball. Zach Wheeler had a Cy Young type of season, didn't win it, but very, very good season, great fastball. And then number 5 on this list is Anthony Sclefani. So I think what I said earlier about how they kind of get great results in uncharacteristic ways is not always the case. It's also just you've got guys who aren't valued as highly showing up on lists that are filled with some of the best players in the game. It's kind of like Brandon Belt with his weighted runs created plus being third behind, is it Trout and Soto, or is it like Acuna and Harper? It's two of the best, Tatis and Harper, and then Belt. And so they just found a way, whether leading in unorthodox categories like Tyler Rogers in some ways, maybe not unorthodox, but just less thought of categories, and getting great results out of players who are not thought of as highly as some of the other players they find themselves on lists with. So that's really what I'm trying to say. And that is all the time we have for today. I could go on and on. There's more. We didn't get to the offensive overall metrics about controlling the zone, but we can continue this conversation at a later date. At some point this week, I want to update you on the state of the lockout. Spring training would be starting in less than 10 days if we were not locked out, but that's extremely likely to be delayed at this point. There are owners' meetings in Florida, this week, and we're going to get a press conference out of Rob Manfred So we'll have all kinds of updates for you later in the week. And I also want to squeeze in a mailbag. So please come back. We're 3 days a week for now. We go back to 5 days a week. Once the lockout ends, we're going to go back to 5 days a week. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it, leaving a review, also liking, commenting, subscribing on YouTube, all of that good stuff. So thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, thanks again for listening. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Stay Locked On Giants.